Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday, November 30th, 2021 meeting of the Arlington Electoral Board. I call this meeting to order. And our first order of business is to adopt our meeting minutes from the September 9th Electoral Board meeting, and then the November 2nd through 6th Electoral Board meeting when we had the provisional voter meeting and the canvass. So again, reminder, all of the draft minutes are posted on our website for your review. And with that, I will move that we adopt the September 9th Electoral Board meeting minutes. All right. So moved. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none. All right, moving on to the November 2nd through 6th Electoral Board meetings. I move that we adopt the meeting minutes for the November 2nd through 6th Electoral Board meeting.
Second.
So moved. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no.
Yes, I'm sorry to keep you waiting.
No problem. And we're just joined by Scott McGeary. He's adopted the minutes.
Good.
And no problem. Well, our first and really only substantive item on the agenda tonight is to have a post-election report and go over some interesting data from the November 2nd, 2021 general election. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gretchen Reinemeyer to give us a presentation on this information.
So just as to start, so this information is available on our website. If you go over to Electoral Board and Staff and Electoral Board meeting minutes, you can find the post-election report, and we'll have the minutes and video of this meeting posted here after this meeting. So this is something we started doing last year, just kind of pulling together data from this election to give a sneak peek into what, to tell us a little bit more about this election. So 2021, I will fill out the rest of we don't have data from November and December yet because we haven't hit there yet, but I will add that information in when we get to the end of the year. So we processed 45,000 registrations. This is lower than last year, but not actually that much. It's about on par with last year. The big change this year is that 77% of registrations were started at the DMV. That's a big change from last year when I think only about 56% of the registrations were coming from the DMV. And that is a reflection of the DMVs have been open this entire year. And that's probably also a sign that automatic voter registration. So when you go to the DMV to make a transaction, it is, you now have to opt out of updating your registration rather than opting in. So that's probably a reflection of that policy change. Voter turnout, we had the highest, I did add a historical comparison chart down here. So this is the highest percentage of voters that have voted in a governor's race in Arlington since we have been keeping statistics on this. Is that a correct statement? Mm-hmm. Okay. So we had 62% of active voters participate in this election. Half of the voters chose to vote at their polling location on election day. And then 16% voted by mail and 29% in person this election. You can see the dramatic increase of voters starting to shift from election day voting to voting before the election. And that's a reflection of those new laws that were passed that allowed anybody to vote before the election without needing an excuse. Okay.
I think the previous record, if I'm wrong, was the 89 election when Doug Wilder won. I think the turnout at that time was like 61.2, 61.5. So this is the new record.
Yes, it's the new, yeah. It's also, my prediction for the next governor's race is that we will break 100,000 voters. We'll see if I'm right. So, so we have the, let's see. So, voting by mail. So we always do send out more ballots than ballots that ultimately are counted, and that's for a couple of reasons. The biggest reason are what we call UOCAVA voters. Those are uniformed and overseas citizens. So when they request, when they fill out their request to vote, that request is good for 2 elections. So we had a lot request to vote in the presidential election that automatically received ballots for this election. They maybe didn't request a ballot specifically for this governor's race. And we had around 2,500 voters in that category.
The return rate for those voters is always low, and a lot of that's because they have a lot of barriers to voting, which include mail, printers, things. So yeah, so we did, so we mailed out around 19,000 ballots. And then we ultimately counted 14,700. 1,200 people chose to vote in person rather than returning their mail ballot. That is substantially lower than last year. We were seeing a much higher rate last year of people that requested a mail ballot, but ultimately chose to vote in person. And we did reject 132 reasons. All of those ballots that were rejected were for a material omission that was not corrected by the election. Around, I believe it's 60 of those were because they did not have a witness signature, just to give you an idea. For the return method, most of the voters returning their mail ballots are returning them by mail. A small percentage do choose to return that one of our drop boxes or in person. And here you can see the most popular drop boxes are Central Library and here at Courthouse. Westover is also quite popular. Let's see, moving, any questions? Okay.
So about 3,000 mail-in ballots were not returned, give or take?
Yep. But around 2,000 of those were for overseas individuals
Okay.
who have a low return rate anyway.
That's in a study.
So for voters who are choosing to, who don't want to vote that mail ballot and they're choosing to vote in person instead, they have a couple of options for how they can do that. They can exchange their ballot during early voting. They can exchange it on election day. They can have a ballot reissued to them during early voting, or they can vote a provisional ballot on election day. So you can see it's a pretty even split over how voters who vote by mail are choosing to opt to being an in-person voter. In terms of issues or rejections, let's see. Ballots during the mail ballot process can be rejected at 2 points, either before we accept them, and that's because their ballot contains an omission that prevents us from being able to accept it, or it can be rejected by the scanner when it's going to be scanned. So ballots that contained omissions, we contacted 310 voters, notifying them that there was an omission on their ballot. 178 of these individuals did correct their ballot by election day. Or by noon the Friday after the election. We had 197 ballots that were rejected by the scanner, but when this happens, these ballots are counted. They're just counted by hand by a team of election officers. So those rejection rates are on par with national rejection rates.
I happen to recall what were the most common errors on the scanner.
I don't. I can see if we have that data available. I'm not sure we will.
If it's lines put through or circles or check marks, whatever. If it's
So I did not see these ballots, but I can definitely send a message to the hand counts, the people who organize that, and they'll be able to tell me. So, yeah.
I think the instructions, those that were certainly helpful.
Mm-hmm.
They were strengthened as we on. Thanks. There's a change. More perfectly clear how the ballot will be marked.
Yeah.
What I saw in my visits is probably errors of trust. Hymns were that the election officers repeating the instruction to try to help the voters correctly.
Yeah. And the number of under votes on election day, when you looked at the tapes of what was reported election night, was very, very small, one or two precincts. So, so for early voting, we did have 3 sites open this year. The main site was here at 2100 Clarendon Boulevard, and it was open for 45 days, and 2 Saturdays and 1 Sunday. 18,000 voters voted here at this main site. The remaining sites opened Saturday, October 23rd, and they were open 2 Saturdays, 1 Sunday, and 3 weekdays. And we had almost 4,000 voters at Madison and just over 5,000 voters at Walter Reed. Wait times at these sites did exceed 30 minutes the final Saturday at 2 locations. But for the other 44 days of voting, wait times were between 0 and 15 minutes for a majority of voters. So
My recollection was the early voting in person turnout really was towards the very end.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it was really slow the first few weeks.
yes, it was, yeah, and that's certainly a chart that we can add to show how it ramped up.
Right.
So normally, normally we see it during those last 2 weeks. I would say there was a big push that last week.
Yeah.
That really drove turnout up that last Saturday.
And last year it was kind of steady the whole time.
It started, it definitely started heavy and stayed heavy the entire 45 days.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I remember looking at the data dashboard that Gretchen very helpfully put together, and the numbers for the first 3-4 weeks were so small, and then it just took off the last 2 weeks.
And that's one of the reasons we track those numbers for staffing and when we need to find bigger spaces to accommodate so that we don't have a line. So we'll continue to do that. Let's see, election day. So we had 433 election officers help us out this election, and we did have 1 high school volunteer. All of the training was conducted online this year, and that's in part because it was when we needed to reserve rooms for training, it was very difficult to get them in the summer because much of the county was still closed at that point in time. We did have 96% of the individuals who answered the survey indicated that they would be coming back, which is very encouraging for retention. The Chiefs were rated very well. 88% received a favorable rating. And most election officers did think the online training was sufficient for them to conduct their job. They did request more videos, so we will be hopefully able to do that in the next year. And in a weird, 100% of the people who responded to the survey said they felt as safe as they could given the pandemic, which is something we like to hear. In terms of provisional data, provisional ballots are ballots that are issued on election day when a voter's eligibility cannot be determined. So 383 provisional ballots were ultimately counted, and 362 of those were because of a mail ballot had been issued or an absentee ballot had been issued to a voter, and we had not received that absentee ballot back in our office. The vast majority of provisional ballots accepted were because of an absentee ballot.
Over half of all provisional ballots cast were because someone didn't return their absentee ballot in time. So I think that's certainly a trend I've noticed the last couple of years, last year especially too. That's the #1 reason people vote provisionally. They request a mail-in ballot, they forget about it, they don't return it, and they want to vote on election day. And in all those cases that we can verify by noon Friday that did not return their mail-in ballot, we count their provisional ballot.
And that is one of the feedback that came from our chiefs is we are seeing an increase in the number of provisional ballots being issued every election. And it is becoming more onerous for the chiefs to be able to do this on election day. So we might look at adding a procedural specialist or a new position to help with that paperwork of administering these for the voters on election day.
Yeah, because I don't think that's going to change much.
No.
I don't either, especially with the liability of the mail right now. You just never know when it's going to be.
And the other reasons people vote provisionally are commonly they vote in the wrong precinct.
Yeah, that was a bulk of the rejections.
They thought they were registered to vote, but they weren't, or they registered after the deadline. Those reasons are fairly common, but by far the most common is the absentee ballot had not been returned by election day.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it would make sense if you have room in the budget for additional staff person actually to help process these. Very helpful.
Questions on?
Yeah.
Where you say at the top of this form. High school student page or?
A page, yes.
all?
Yeah, it was a page, and they were recommended to us by an election officer. So
Okay,
I think an election officer's neighbor, if memory serves.
Right.
So we didn't run a high school recruitment program this year due to, we didn't have enough staff for it. So.
And then you suggest how many election officers we need next year, given given the difference that's on the ballot.
Yeah, this really is, it's something we'll keep an eye on, but I do think it'll probably be around the same. That 433 is kind of our minimum. And if we add a precinct, which we may or may not do depending on redistricting, then that adds 5 to 7 people right there. So we might remove somebody from another precinct, but we'll need to add them to different precincts. So, but I like to say 450 is what we need to run a November election.
Whatever's on the ballot.
Yeah.
Okay, that's just helpful to know since next year would be the least number of offices on the ballot.
Yeah.
Well, last year you had about 800.
We did 770.
Okay.
Yeah.
That made sense of this variation.
Yeah. Yeah. We might, well, every precinct is required to have a minimum of 3. We really prefer 5, just in case you have anybody call out with because they're sick or drop out at the last minute. You're not scrambling to find a replacement. So that's where in a November election, we like that to be closer to 7 or 8 per precinct, just to give us that cushion. Spoiled ballots. So there were 1,203 spoiled ballots over the course of this election, which is high, but it's not as high considering 95,000 people voted this election. So.
Why do you think that made people spoil their ballots? Was it because the House delegates issue where people got confused with the ballot?
Yeah, a lot of the spoiled ballots I saw are the county board because they had so many county board candidates. They thought it was a vote for 2-year, and then the House of Delegates, they thought they should vote for everything in the House of Delegates. So, yeah, so it's between the two races that account for probably most of the spoiled ballots. We don't really look at spoiled ballots. We just spoil them and put them in an envelope. So we don't always know, but that seemed to be the biggest issue. And on election day, I did not hear of any voter wait times that exceeded 30 minutes. I don't know, you guys know. So things went pretty smoothly on election day, which is what we like to see.
It seemed like the flow was pretty steady all day. It was never really crazy busy, and it was never dead.
Yeah, no, it was definitely, I know internally in the office, the phones were very busy, and it was a lot of people needing to know where they should go vote on election day. So. And then just in terms of staffing for this election, we have 7 permanent employees this election, and we worked a total of 322 comp and overtime hours. 40 temporary employees were hired, and they worked 506 overtime hours, or 13 hours of overtime per person over 2 months. And then 31 election officers and temporary employees noted above helped staff the early voting locations, the 2 extra sites, well, the 2 extra sites and extra days down here, and then the 433 election officers. So,
how much retention do you expect for election officers for next year?
I think our retention is pretty high right now. We still have a lot of people. We have more interest in working right now than we do have spaces available. So there's definitely an opportunity to add some of these specialized positions. Or some other opportunities for those who want to help with the process. So.
Well, thank you for putting this together. I thought it was extremely helpful, and I think for the last year and then this year, we've started a new tradition. We have a post-election analysis, which is very, very helpful.
I will say my 4-page analysis is much shorter than DC's 88-page analysis.
Yeah. Well, you hit all the highlights, and thank you to all the Arlington voters for setting a new record for a gubernatorial election. I wasn't really expecting that, and I don't think many people were, but I think it was a very well-run election, so kudos to you and your team for another well-run election. I think for how representative this election will be for future elections in terms of turnout and how people vote either early or by mail or in person, hard to know. I think this is probably closer to the norm than last year was.
Yeah.
Going forward, so we'll see. But I thought it was a very good election, well run, and really great to see so many people turn out Scott Kim.
Yes, yes, indeed. And in addition to thanks to Gretchen and her outstanding team, also thanks for outstanding job as chair and chair.
And one related thing, not really staffing, but for those of you in the audience, some of you may know, the electoral board composition is determined by who wins the governor's race. So right now we have 2 Democrats, 1 Republican, because the governor is a Democrat currently. Since Glenn Youngkin won, he's Republican. When my term ends at the end of next year, at midnight on January 1st, 2023, I will be replaced by a Republican on the board. So I look forward to seeing who Scott and his colleagues end up choosing, but that's the way it works at all electoral boards in Virginia, not just Arlington. So that is one result of this year's election. So I still will be here for another year. Looking forward to it, but that's just the way it's set up in the code of Virginia and the Constitution. So.
And this year, Scott is up for reappointments. And I do believe we will be hearing that in the next week or 2. So,
You're pretty generous.
yes. So, but don't print anything yet. So,
All right, well, should we take any questions from people in the audience if they have any before we move on?
So if there's anybody in the audience who would like to ask a question, you can unmute or raise your hand.
I have a quick question, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
I was just curious, for the election officer staffing, what was the minimum and maximum at a particular precinct?
I don't have that information. I can get back to you on that. So precinct size, we do base the number of election officers by the number of voters anticipated to show up at that precinct, and our precinct size varies from 700 voters in one precinct to 6,000 voters in another precinct. So obviously, we're going to staff the 2 precincts a little differently. So, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, well, hearing no other questions, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Just a reminder that this report will be posted on our website for your review and perusal. So the next item is a summary of the October 5th County Board work session on ranked choice voting.
So once again, this meeting is available on the county board section of the website, and you do have to scroll all the way down to the work sessions for 2021, and then there's the county board work session on October 5th, 2021, and the video and audio are available for that meeting. So I was asked by the county board to present on ranked choice voting and redistricting. I did start with redistricting just because the way Virginia code is written, it's the county board's responsibility to approve new precinct lines. And when we get new district lines, we will have to make sure each precinct is wholly contained in a single election district. So we are anticipating having to move some voters around when we do get the new precinct lines. Unfortunately, the precincting or the redistricting process in Virginia has hit some snags. So the redistricting commission is no longer meeting, and the decision has been passed over to the Supreme Court. And I do not have any updates or timeline on when we can expect to see new districts in Virginia. I do know that there has been at least one lawsuit filed calling for a special election next year for the House of Delegates districts, that the current districts are in violation of Virginia code. So wait and see. We'll just have to see how this process shapes out.
I think I saw that the Supreme Court of Virginia chose a special master for the Democrats and for the Republicans a couple weeks ago. Those are the experts who helped draw the lines. But Gretchen's right. There's no timeline. You can't really force the Supreme Court to do anything within a certain amount of time. So we're wait and see.
Right.
So, yep. So, in terms of ranked choice voting, I answered mainly answered questions from the county board, and they had questions varied, and there was talk of potentially following up with another educational session of meeting with experts to ask some more
detailed questions. I have not had any follow-up from the county board at this point, but I assume that is because they are being polite and letting me wrap up the election before reaching back out to me. So I wouldn't necessarily say that's cause for concern. So.
Yeah, well, thanks for giving a presentation at that work session. I thought it was very helpful. I think the county board learned a lot about the process that they didn't necessarily know going into it. I heard a lot of questions from the county board, just figuring out how the method of counting works exactly, especially when there are 2 seats, which happens every 4 years. 2 seats open in Arlington, which happens every 4 years. So yeah, who knows what's going to happen next, but I thought it was a very helpful presentation. It's really in the board's hands.
Yes, my compliments again. It was an excellent presentation, discussion, and you did a fine job of addressing
Yes, thank
questions.
you. Yeah.
And I thought it was educational both through the rank and the redistricting process, particularly given the rather all senior county board members and not being as understanding, we not as familiar with the redistricting and what that means.
Yeah.
And the impact of what they asked the General Assembly to provide them the authority to do.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they're.
Yeah, so we do anticipate more news from them. Not sure when, but eventually.
All right, Kim, any comments or questions?
No.
All right, well, the next agenda item is an update on hiring new positions. I'll turn it over to Griffin for that as well.
So as the public might be aware, our deputy registrar here in Arlington has been promoted to the general registrar out in Prince William County, and we are very excited that Eric has been given this position, but it does mean we have a vacancy. So we are currently recruiting for a deputy registrar, deputy director. The recruitment is open, and we are accepting applications right now. I anticipate it closing next week, and then we'll start reviewing applications, and my hope is to move quickly on that process. And then also down the line, we will be recruiting for 3 additional positions. We are still in the process of getting the positions published to the website, but I hope to have those done as soon as possible. So on the horizon, we will be recruiting for an outreach and communications specialist. And this will be somebody to draft and implement a cohesive outreach and communications plan to adhere to legal requirements and the county's branding. And this position will require the individual to speak Spanish. And this is a position that we're converting from an assistant registrar position to create this position. Okay. We'll also be recruiting for 2 part-time positions. One will be an assistant to our mail ballot manager. So we are seeking somebody just to help kind of that mail ballot process as we continue to see it grow over the next year. It is a very labor-intensive process, so we just need another professional in there for day-to-day operations. And then the 4th positions will be recruiting for a part-time operations coordinator. And this is somebody to assist with polling locations, early voting staffing, and the logistical support for those 2 operations. Early voting, once again, when you're open for voting for 45 days before an election, it's taking a toll. So we need to add these positions to help with that workload. And both of these 2 part-time positions were included in our new budget for this year. So.
Well, thank you for the update. Yeah. We were very excited for Eric to take on his new role in Prince William County. That will not be a small job. It's a very large and growing county, so we wish him the best. I'm sure we'll hear from him.
Yes, I have heard from him twice.
Yes. And thanks for the update in the other positions as well. My takeaway is I'm very happy to see the support we're getting from the board and the manager's office for additional positions.
Yeah.
Elections are, we always have them every year in Arlington, but they're long. It's not just election day; it's election season, and having additional staffing help is going to be crucial for making everyone's life a little bit easier and for maintaining the level of performance that we get every year here. So,
Yes, thanks again.
all right. Well, as I said at the beginning of the meeting, it was a pretty light agenda. So I will open up to any questions from the audience before we adjourn.
And then the only other business item I had was the swearing in ceremony
All
for
right.
Takis. Parentanus will be on December 14th at 4:30 in the afternoon.
All right, we'll have to take any questions anyone might have or comments. All right, hearing none, I move that we adjourn the November 30th, 2021 meeting of the Arlington Electoral Board. So moved. All those in favor, aye. All those opposed, hearing none. As you all may know, we meet as needed. I expect, unless something comes up, we won't meet in December, probably not January, but under the code, we're required to meet in February and March. So we will be back in February at the latest. Thank you and have a happy holidays.